Our theme this month is the Sacred Continuum, and today's topic is living in the spaces between prayers. Deborah Burdick, who is sometimes known as the Brain Lady, is an internationally known expert in mindfulness. She tells this story on herself about the first time it was necessary for her to have an MRI. She described that moment when her head moved into that confined compartment in the machine, and her body began to demonstrate the symptoms of claustrophobia. The technician slid her back out of the machine and asked her if she was okay. She paused for a moment, and then with a smile, she said, "It's okay. I can do this." So he slid her back into that confined space. And what she meant by that, and what she immediately began to do, was what she had been teaching her students. She began breathing more deeply. She focused on her breath and began to count each breath in and count each breath out. And she said, despite the clanking and banging of that machine, she eventually was actually able to relax and even to doze off. Well, isn't that kind of what it's like to live in this modern world? And for any one of us to invite silence into our lives in the midst of the activity and the attractions that today's world offers is a courageous and challenging choice. Yet it's the very thing that enables us to return to the noisy, active, sometimes wacky world that's all around us without being overwhelmed, without being compromised, without being pulled in directions that bring us pain and grief. So, as you've already heard twice this morning, our theme this month is the Sacred Continuum. And week by week, as well as moment by moment, we've been addressing the processes that apply in learning to live the truth that we speak. That we speak it in our prayers, we speak it in our spiritual mind treatments, we speak it in our spiritual practice. We began by starting this series with, does prayer really change anything? We talked about the realization about that what is changed is a realization that unfolds in us as a result of doing the work, and that the change is not out there in something else. The change is within us. So, and it's not while we're in prayer or in treatment. The change occurs because the intentions that we state in our prayers, we choose to embody in our own lives. The Sacred Continuum, the book by Stephanie Christensen, is the Sacred Continuum that I've been referring to. And it's been our month's theme, offering that the spaces between our formal spiritual practices is just as important as the time we spend in prayer or spiritual mind treatment. So that's the topic today, living in the spaces between prayer. Divine presence, spiritual energy, is present whether we are acknowledging it in prayer or ignoring it as we think and speak in our everyday lives. From that we can deduce that our sacred source, substance, and power is always present. It's always active. It's never separate or absent from us. Even when we are not calling it forth, it doesn't turn off or go someplace else. The space between our formal spiritual practice or prayers is just as sacred, just as creative as the prayers themselves. So we must grant to our every thought and our every word the same spiritual value that we assign to our affirmative prayer. We can consciously live our prayers by choosing our thoughts carefully, moment to moment, to enhance and to improve our lives. A young married man whose growing family included a boy who was approaching the age when he would be eligible to play baseball in Little League. The proud father was enamored by the fact that in each day, this youngster would demonstrate some new talent, some new word, or way to get into trouble. So one day, driving home from work, the father drove past the local city park, thinking, this is a good activity for my son to be able to focus his energies on. So, and sure enough, when the father got to the local park, the Little League season was underway. So he pulled in, he parked the car, he walked over to the closest baseball diamond and picked a vacant seat in the bleachers. He didn't know anybody there on the field or in the stands. But he wanted to be in that moment, that baseball. Soon he and his son would be a part of this. So he sat down behind the players' bench on the first base line, and he asked one of the players what the score was. And the boy turned back to him with a smile on his face, and he said, "Oh, we're behind 14-0. "Really?" the man said. "Well, I have to say you don't look very discouraged by that." And the kid said, "Discouraged? Oh, why would we be discouraged? We haven't been up to bat yet." Life in the spaces between prayers is much like baseball in many ways. And living is our practice time between prayer. In baseball, there's also a lot of time between ups, as the kids call it, or being at bat. That time in between is what's called defense, or being in the field. And for each individual player, it's also sitting on the bench, waiting for a turn at bat. Well, life in the spaces between prayers is all that time that we're out running around in the world, or sitting on the sidelines, awaiting our chance. You see, it has to do with how we view the whole game of life. Dr. Holmes puts it this way. He said, "We cannot make affirmations for 15 minutes a day and spend the rest of our time denying the things which we have affirmed and or affirming the things that we have denied and still obtain the results we seek." Now, for some, it may seem cumbersome, tiring, maybe outright annoying to compel ourselves to be aware of every little thing that we're thinking about, speaking of, when we're not actively praying. However, we are always thinking, and many of us frequently speaking. So learning to make our thoughts and our words positive rather than negative is simply a shift in focus and paying more attention to what we're doing, what we're saying. In many families, grandmas or tutus volunteer to fill in for mothers when And those mothers have occasion to be gone from the home for a period of time. I heard this story told by a grandma who went to stay with one of her grandchildren while Mama was away tending to family business. The little boy tried hard to be good for his grandma, and she was impressed, actually, with how good he actually was. But after she'd been there for about 3 days, he asked her timidly when his mama was coming home. "Tomorrow," she told him. "Isn't that great?" Well, he thought about that for a minute, and then he sighed. "Phew, I only have one more day to be good." So sometimes I think spiritual practice kind of feels like that. Only one more treatment, and I'm done. Only one more affirmation, and I'm off the hook. Maybe one more Om Namah Padme Hum, and I can escape from having to do meditation. Or maybe just one more day to be good, and then I can break loose. The formula for real freedom and peace of mind, however, is to keep practicing being positive rather than negative, to keep practicing living in alignment with truth until it becomes our way. It's not unlike learning to drive a car. At first, it's necessary for us to remind ourselves frequently which pedal is for the gas and which pedal is for the brake. We need to remind ourselves to signal before turning, to look in the rear view and the side mirrors before changing lanes, and to yield at stop signs. But eventually, the flow and the movement of driving becomes natural. Eventually, we're able to drive and perhaps listen to the radio, or to drive and perhaps carry on a conversation. Well, most of us, anyway. The same process applies to learning to live the truth we speak of in our prayers. And although we can choose to drive a car or take the Helion bus instead, we cannot choose whether to think or not. Although we can choose, as the young boy in the story did, to behave ourselves for a specified time, we cannot choose whether to think or not, because we're always thinking. And though we may consciously speak words of truth in our prayer work, often between the prayers, we think and we speak unconsciously from the habitual patterns of belief that we've accepted and don't question as our reality. So when this happens, we are often contradicting the very words officially sent forth to change, improve, or heal us. But we can choose to think correctly. And we can choose what we will focus on and speak of in our lives. Ernest Holmes says, we do this by being in constant recognition that we are in the presence, meaning in the presence of universal love, in the presence of universal power, in the presence of universal source and substance, in the presence of the universal receiver. For example, how many of us speak our word regularly or periodically in the form of prayer or spiritual mind treatment? Recognize that the presence is God always and in all things. Not merely just when we recognize it as such. When you open your eyes after prayer and you look out into the world, are you still consciously aware that God is the only presence? That this divine spirit is the very shape and form of all you see? Or do you, as I have sometimes been prone to do, notice that everybody who's driving slower than you is an idiot, but anybody who's driving faster is a maniac. How easy it is to slip back into those patterns. You see, it's vital for us to be conscious and awake to our every thought, because every thought is actually a prayer, whether or not it's officially designated as such. So we see that it is not true that one thought will create while another will not. What did I just say? Maybe, just maybe, I should repeat that. It's not true that one thought creates while another does not. What's true is that every thought creates. So whether we're using affirmations, prayer, spiritual mind treatment, creative visualizations, or not, every time we think, our thought moves. Our thoughts fall like seeds into that rich soil of creative consciousness. And whether our thought is positive or negative, good or bad, supportive or condemning, that very thought has everything it requires to grow in the garden of our experience. Now, does this mean we don't need to pray or do spiritual mind practice? Can we just go around like Mary Poppins and with a smile and a song and just think happy thoughts and forget the negative stuff or the spiritual stuff? Well, we can if we choose. Just think happy thoughts. Just do happy things and make happy noises. In fact, now that you think of it, that's not a bad idea, is it? However, I have a very strong sense that everyone here realizes that if we truly want to live a rich, full, satisfying, purposeful life, we would be wise to spend the time necessary to train our thought. Because trained thought is far more powerful than untrained. And when we give conscious power to our thought, we're better able to create and maintain the life we choose. So the time spent in spiritual practice, in prayer, and spiritual mind treatment is like the time spent in baseball practice, in practicing the piano, in learning to drive a car. The more we do any of those things, the better we get at it. And as you know, those who have become great baseball players, great pianists, even great race car drivers, continue to practice their craft every day, challenging themselves to stay at the top of their game. Our prayer work need not merely be a momentary retreat from the conditions and appearances of daily life. This is the time when we create the template for what we choose to be, to have, to know. Truth is revealed to us, though, as we set upon knowing it. Divine Spirit reveals itself when we're open to receiving it. And neither truth nor Divine Spirit retreat when the words, "and so it is," or "Amen," are uttered. When our minds are open to the infinite mind, we continuously are inspired and guided. So why limit that to 15, 30, or 45 minutes a day that are your formal spiritual practice? Why not make the whole day, every waking moment, a time when you are a receiver of that magnificent, limitless, universal intelligence that is a ceaseless fountainhead of unconditional love? So when your prayer is complete, Know that you have truly let go of limited or false ideas and beliefs. When your prayer is finished, know that you intentionally remain immersed in spirit and nothing else. Each time you finish praying, continue to realize the power and the effectiveness of all of your thoughts and all of your words. Grant to every thought and every word the same spiritual value that you assign to your words of prayer. For as you realize that you can constantly experience a relationship with Spirit, and as you realize you can live a life of freedom, which is innately yours as a spiritual being, you're choosing to live in the moment-to-moment spiritual context of Spirit as all. You're living your life motivated by love, inspired by joy, directed by wisdom, and balanced in peace. You'll be driving the roadways without stress. You'll be good when you don't have to be. And you'll be coming up to bat, ready to hit a home run. And so it is.